Hi, Damon Chetson here from the Chetson firm in Raleigh, North Carolina. I want to talk to you a little bit today about restoring your driving privileges in North Carolina. I've recently been contacted by a number of folks who are living outside of North Carolina but who are unable to get driving privileges or a valid driving license in another state because they have had their license suspended by the state of North Carolina. In the olden days, each state was an island. So in the 1950s and 40s, a suspension in one state wouldn't necessarily apply against the individual if the individual moved to another state. But in the 1960s, the various states joined together in a driver license compact with the idea of creating a one driver, one license, one record system. They also created a National Driver Register, which is a computerized database that allows the states to upload information about individual drivers and suspensions, so that if I have a suspension in North Carolina and I try to go to Rhode Island or Florida, Rhode Island and Florida will check the database to make sure I don't have suspensions in other states, and if I do, they'll deny me a license in those states as well. So what does this mean? This means that if you have had your license suspended in North Carolina, you will probably be prevented from getting a valid driver's license in other states. Well, what can you do about this situation? Eventually, you will have to return to North Carolina to have your driving privileges restored here, and that will enable you to get a valid driver's license in another state. How do you do this? Well, there are two steps to North Carolina's restoration process. The first step is that you will need to apply to the North Carolina Department of Motor Vehicles in writing for a hearing. And the second step is that if a hearing is granted, you will need to attend in person and provide evidence and witnesses showing that your license should be restored. Step 1. How to ask for a hearing. North Carolina's Department of Motor Vehicles wants to see three things from people whose licenses have been suspended and are requesting a restoration of their driver's privileges. The first piece of information is evidence of successful completion of any alcohol or drug treatment programs. The second piece of information is a complete criminal history from not only North Carolina, but any jurisdictions in which you've lived. And the third piece of information is a complete driving history, not only from North Carolina, but from any jurisdictions in which you've lived. Step 2 occurs if you have been granted a hearing by the North Carolina Department of Motor Vehicles. North Carolina's DMV will schedule a hearing for you, and you must attend that hearing. But we can work with the DMV to schedule a hearing that is most convenient for you. So for instance, if you're traveling back to North Carolina to see some family or friends, or if you have some time off of work, we can work with the DMV to schedule a hearing that would be more convenient for you. The second is that you will likely want to bring some witnesses who can testify about your clean living and your sobriety. And we can work with you on what witnesses might testify and how to go about getting testimony or affidavits. In addition, you and any witnesses you provide will be sworn under oath to testify truthfully about your sobriety. So you should be able to provide some witnesses who can testify truthfully that you have indeed remained sober and that you would be a good candidate and would be a good and careful driver if your privileges are restored. In addition, you should try to provide other evidence that would be helpful to convincing a DMV hearing officer that you are a good candidate. For instance, work history including the names of the supervisors, addresses, dates of employment, educational history including any degrees earned or any certificates, proof of any responsibilities you've had at any charitable organizations, or if you have a letter from a minister about help you've done around church or church-related organizations, all of that information will be incredibly helpful in proving to a DMV hearing officer that you have a strong support network who is going to help you be a careful driver and remain sober. Now, the key to all this is that you need to prepare. You're going to be spending quite a bit of money to travel across the country to return to North Carolina, and you should take this process seriously. It makes no sense to spend all of the money on taking time off of work and flying across the country and assembling the witnesses if you aren't preparing your evidence for the hearing. Now, there's no guarantee that all of that work will get your license restored, but preparation is better than no preparation at all. So what happens if you're successful? If you're successful and want your driver's license in North Carolina, it's likely that you'll have a limited driving license restored to you, which means, for instance, that you'd be allowed to drive from home to work and from work to home, or that you would have conditions attached which would require you to report back to the DMV in 6 or 12 months about your sobriety and provide additional evidence before you're granted a full license with full privileges. In addition, if you are not interested in getting a license in North Carolina, you will likely get a clearance letter if you're successful. And that clearance letter is a letter you would take to a DMV in another state and show the DMV that North Carolina has lifted its suspension and restored your driving privileges in the state. Now, again, the keys to success are to make sure that you're as prepared as possible to convince a DMV hearing officer that you're a good candidate for restoration. Again, preparation, preparation, preparation. So the question I've been asked is, do I need a lawyer for this process? Should I hire an attorney? And the answer to that is that you don't, strictly speaking, need an attorney. You can go into these hearings and put on the evidence yourself, but you should be sure to prepare enough in advance and be competent enough to put on a good hearing to convince that DMV hearing officer that you should have your license restored. In addition, there's no guarantee that if you do hire a lawyer or an attorney that you would definitely get your license back. The hearing officer could reject your license request even if you do have a lawyer. So there are no guarantees either way, and if you think you can put on a good case supporting your petition to have your license restored, then you may not need to hire a lawyer. But the question you need to ask yourself is, if you're going to spend all of this time and effort and money to come back to North Carolina, don't be so foolish as to, quote, save money by not hiring a lawyer if you don't think you're going to be able to put on evidence at a hearing that is going to convince a hearing officer. The other question that's been asked of me is, well, how can I save some money in this process? And the answer to that is, the more work you do yourself, the less expensive it will be to hire an attorney. So, for instance, you can contact DMVs in your state and other states where you've lived and get your certified driving history. You can contact states on your own and get your criminal histories, and you can gather as much information as possible about where you've lived and your work history and your educational history, so that you're doing the bulk of the work yourself and not leaving that up to an attorney who you'd have to pay. In addition, if you can create a timeline of this information and have a complete history of yourself and present that to an attorney you may hire, you'll have saved the attorney a lot of time and a lot of expense, and it will cost you less than if you just simply gave the whole case to an attorney to prepare. Again, the more work you do yourself, the less you'll have to pay an attorney. And I have a list of all of the DMVs across the country and contact information so that you can do some of that work yourself. Again, I'm here to help, and if you have any questions about how to restore your driving privileges in North Carolina, feel free to give me a call at 919-352-9411 or send me an email.